Shadows at Foilhomurrum Lighthouse, a Hercule Poirot Irish mystery, Part 1. The light that failed the western coast of Ireland had a way of humbling even the most confident traveler. The Atlantic did not merely arrive upon the shore. It assaulted it relentlessly, rhythmically, as though the land itself were an inconvenience. Gray waves rose and fell like breathing giants, their white crests tearing themselves apart against blackened rocks that had endured centuries of such punishment. Hercule Poirot stood very still on the cliff path, his gloved hands clasped neatly behind his back, his immaculate mustache bristling faintly in the salt wind. He disliked disorder. He disliked dampness. And yet, he had agreed most reluctantly to come to Foilhomurrum. Ahead of him, perched upon a jagged promontory like a solitary sentinel, rose Foilhomurrum Lighthouse. Tall, cylindrical, and pale against the bruised sky, it seemed less a structure than a warning. Its lantern room was dark. Poirot noticed this immediately. A lighthouse, he murmured, his French accent lending the word a musical precision, which does not shine. Ah, that is already a contradiction, n'est-ce pas? Captain O'Shea, the retired Coast Guard officer who had insisted on escorting him, shifted uneasily beside him. It was lit last night, Monsieur Poirot. Until it wasn't. Poirot turned his head slightly. And when, precisely, did the light fail? Just after midnight. Ships reported confusion. One nearly ran aground. By morning, O'Shea swallowed. By morning, Seamus O'Rourke was dead. Poirot's eyes, green, sharp, endlessly observant, returned to the lighthouse. Fog rolled in from the sea, slow and deliberate, curling around the base of the tower like grasping fingers. A man does not simply die, Poirot said softly. At the exact moment a light fails, there is always, how do you say, a reason. Seamus O'Rourke lay in the keeper's quarters at the base of the lighthouse, his body already removed but his presence lingering unmistakably. Poirot felt it at once, the oppressive stillness of a place where life had ended violently. The room was modest. A narrow bed, a wooden table bearing a chipped mug of cold tea, a radio set, silent. Everything appeared ordinary too ordinary. Poirot disliked that even more. He lived alone? Poirot asked. Yes, O'Shea replied. Widower. No children. 30 years at Foilhomurrum. Poirot bent slightly, examining the floorboards. And yet, he said, tapping the toe of his polished shoe against a faint scuff mark, last night, he was not alone. O'Shea blinked. The guard said no sign of forced entry. Poirot smiled thinly. Forced entry is such a vulgar thing. Often, one opens the door willingly. He straightened and surveyed the room again. His little gray cells were already at work, assembling impressions into questions. Not why had Seamus left the lantern room after midnight? Why was the light mechanism found disengaged? Why did the official report already whisper the word accident? Poirot had seen accidents. This was not one of them. By afternoon, the fog thickened, swallowing the cliffs and reducing the world to a narrow corridor of damp stone and echoing footsteps. Poirot was escorted to Foilhomurrum House, a weather-beaten manor that overlooked the lighthouse from a cautious distance, as though even the land itself mistrusted the tower. Inside, a fire burned low in the hearth. May Flynn rose as Poirot entered. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled tightly back and eyes that had learned restraint through long practice. She managed the lighthouse supplies and oversaw communications with the mainland. Monsieur Poirot, she said, offering a controlled nod. We didn't expect someone like you. No one ever does, Poirot replied pleasantly. Others gathered in the room, each drawn by curiosity or fear. Declan Byrne, the lighthouse engineer, tall and raw-boned, with hands permanently marked by oil and metal. Nora Kelleher, a young nurse from Galway, temporarily assigned to tend to Seamus after a recent illness. Arthur Bell, an English historian, thin and precise, clutching a leather notebook as though it were armor. Poirot studied them all. 4 souls, bound together by isolation, and now by death. I understand, Poirot began gently, that you all believe Seamus O'Rourke's death to be a tragic accident. There was a murmur of agreement that Poirot lifted one finger. "Permit me to disagree." Silence fell. "The lighthouse light failed at precisely 12:17, Poirot continued. "Not before. Not after." Seamus left his post. He descended the tower. He did not return. Declan frowned. "The mechanism is old. It jams." "Ah," Poirot said, turning to him. "But it jammed after being disengaged manually. That requires intention and knowledge." Declan's jaw tightened. Poirot shifted his gaze to Nora. "You were the last to see Seamus alive." She nodded, pale. "He complained of dizziness. I gave him medicine. He said he'd rest. And yet," Poirot said softly, "he climbed the tower shortly after." Arthur Bell cleared his throat. Perhaps he was confused. Poirot smiled at him. Perhaps. But confusion does not explain why the logbook entry for 12 o'clock is missing. Bell's fingers tightened on his notebook. Maeve spoke at last. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot met her eyes. That someone needed the light to fail. And that Seamus O'Rourke knew why. Night fell early. The fog thickened further, pressing against the windows of Foilhomurrum House like a living thing. Poirot stood alone by the window, staring toward the lighthouse. Still dark. A shadow moved near the cliffs, too deliberate to be the fog. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah," he murmured. So the shadows begin to walk. Behind him, the house creaked, old wood shifting under secrets long buried. Somewhere, a door closed softly. Poirot did not turn. He already knew. This was not merely a crime of the present. Foilhomurrum remembered its past, and it was ready to kill to protect it. Asterisk. Part 2. The isolated soul's morning arrived at Foilhomurrum without light. The fog remained, heavy and unyielding, as though the sea itself had decided to occupy the land. It pressed against the windows of Foilhomurrum House, muffling sound and distorting distance. From the manor's upper rooms, the lighthouse was barely visible, a pale ghost where certainty should have stood. Hercule Poirot disliked this profoundly. He sat at the breakfast table, his posture immaculate, his expression faintly reproachful as he examined the tea that had been poured for him. It was weak. Irish tea, Poirot had discovered, often was. Still, he drank it with polite resignation. Isolation, Poirot reflected, did strange things to people. It compressed their emotions, sharpened resentments, magnified secrets. In cities, one could disappear into crowds. At Foilhomurrum, there was nowhere to hide, only places to conceal. Maeve Flynn entered quietly, carrying a ledger under her arm. She moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to responsibility. Yet Poirot noticed the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she avoided looking toward the window. "You slept well, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. "Considering the circumstances," Poirot replied. "I slept sufficiently, though I cannot say the same for my little gray sows. They were most active." Maeve gave a restrained smile and took a seat opposite him. "You believe Seamus was murdered?" Poirot inclined his head. "I believe he was afraid." Maeve's fingers tightened on the ledger. Seamus was afraid of many things. The sea, the storms, old memories. "Ah," Poirot said gently. "Old memories are often the most dangerous." Later that morning, Poirot requested that each resident speak with him individually. He insisted upon it with such courteous firmness that refusal became impossible. Declan Byrne met Poirot in the lighthouse engine room, a place that smelled of oil, rust, and salt. The great mechanism loomed above them, silent now, its glass lenses dull without the guiding flame. "You maintain this equipment," Poirot said. "For 15 years, Declan replied. "I know every bolt, every fault." "Then you know," Poirot continued, "that the light did not fail on its own." Declan's eyes flicked toward the stairs. "I told the guards, it's old, temperamental." Poirot stepped closer, examining the control panel. Temperamental, yes, but obedient? Machines do not act without instruction. Declan exhaled sharply. "Are you accusing me?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I accuse no one yet. I observe." Declan hesitated. Seamus didn't trust the light anymore. Said it lied to him? Poirot's eyebrows rose. Lied? He claimed it showed him things, signals, patterns. I thought it was nonsense. Did you? Poirot asked softly. The Declan said nothing. Nora Kelleher. Nora waited in the small sitting room, hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked younger in daylight, her face pale, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion. You cared for Seamus, Poirot said kindly. Yes, he had spells. Vertigo, night terrors. Did he speak to you of his fears? She nodded. He said the lighthouse remembered things, that it kept secrets. Poirot leaned forward. Did he mention names? Nora hesitated too long. No. Poirot noted the hesitation carefully and stored it away. You arrived here recently, he said. From Galway? Yes. And before Galway? She swallowed. London. Poirot smiled. Ah, so Foilhomurrum is quite the change. Her lips trembled. I wanted quiet. Poirot's eyes softened. Quiet is rarely what one finds in places like this. Arthur Bell received Poirot in his room, surrounded by stacks of books and papers. Maps of the coastline were pinned to the walls, annotated with precise handwriting. You are studying the lighthouse, Poirot said. And the region, Bell replied. Foilhomurrum is historically significant. Indeed? Bell adjusted his spectacles. Smuggling routes, rebel communications. During the early 20th century, this coast was active. Poirot picked up a notebook from the desk. And Seamus O'Rourke assisted you? He was reluctant, Bell admitted. But he knew things. Stories passed down. Stories, Poirot echoed. And records? Bell stiffened. Some records are missing. Poirot smiled pleasantly. Records have a habit of disappearing when they are inconvenient. Bell's voice sharpened. You think history killed him? Poirot met his gaze. I think history provided the motive. Maeve stood with Poirot near the cliffs, the wind tugging at her coat. You manage this place, Poirot said. Yet, you live apart from it? My husband was a keeper, she replied. He died here. Poirot turned to her slowly. Died or disappeared? Maeve's breath caught. They said he fell. And you believed them? I had to. Poirot studied her face. Grief lived there, still, buried, but unhealed. Seamus knew your husband, Poirot said. Double quotes, yes. And recently? Maeve looked toward the lighthouse. Recently, he began asking questions. Poirot nodded. Questions are dangerous things. That evening, as darkness fell once more, the fog thinned just enough for the lighthouse to emerge, a pale tower against the Black Sea. Still unlit, Poirot stood alone at the edge of the cliff path, listening to the waves crash below. Somewhere behind him, footsteps approached and stopped. You should not be here alone, a voice said softly. Poirot did not turn. On the contrary, it is when one is alone that one hears the truth. The footsteps retreated. Poirot smiled faintly. The souls of Foilhomurrum were isolated, yes, but not from one another. They were bound together by something old, something unresolved, and whatever had extinguished the light had not finished yet. Far below, the sea roared its approval. Asterisk Part 3. Footprints in the fog returned before dawn, creeping inland with the patience of something that knew it would not be denied. It wrapped Foilhomurrum in silence so complete that even the sea seemed distant, reduced to a low, resentful murmur. Hercule Poirot awoke early. He had slept poorly, not from fear, but from irritation. The facts refused to arrange themselves neatly. They lay scattered in his mind like mismatched tiles, each bearing a fragment of a pattern that stubbornly resisted completion. He rose, dressed with meticulous care, and left Foilhomurrum House while the others still slept on. The path to the lighthouse was slick with moisture. Grass bent beneath his careful steps, and stones gleamed treacherously in the half-light. Poirot walked slowly, deliberately, pausing often not from fatigue, but from observation. Halfway down the path, he stopped. There, impressed faintly into the damp earth, were footprints. Not fresh, they had softened overnight, but unmistakably human. Two distinct sets. Poirot crouched with some difficulty and examined them. One set was heavy, purposeful. The other lighter, Hesitant. Two people, he murmured, and one who did not wish to be here. He straightened, following the trail with his eyes. The footprints led not directly to the lighthouse entrance, but toward the cliff edge, then circled back. A hesitation. A conversation. A decision. Poirot's little gray cell stirred with satisfaction. Inside the lighthouse, the air was stale and cold. The spiral staircase rose above him, its iron steps worn smooth by decades of use. Poirot began to climb, counting each step under his breath. At the lantern room, he paused. The mechanism lay silent, its great lens dull and lifeless. Poirot examined the control panel carefully. The disengagement lever bore faint scratches, too shallow to be accidental. Fingernails, Poirot said softly. Someone hesitated, or struggled. He turned his attention to the logbook shelf. Empty. But not quite. A faint rectangle of dust marked where the book had been removed hastily, not cleaned away with intention. Poirot smiled grimly. You were in a hurry, he said to the absent culprit. Haste is such a revealing thing. Later that morning, Poirot summoned Captain O'Shea and two local guards to the cliffs below the lighthouse. You see this? Poirot asked, indicating the uneven ground. O'Shea squinted. Footprints? 2 sets. One belonging to Seamus O'Rourke, the other unknown. The guards exchanged looks. We didn't see them yesterday, one said. Because yesterday, Poirot replied, you were looking for certainty. Today, you are looking for truth. He gestured toward the edge. Seamus did not fall. He was led here. O'Shea frowned. There's no sign of a struggle. Poirot's voice sharpened slightly. There is always a struggle. Sometimes it is only in the mind. The discovery unsettled Foilhomurrum House. At luncheon, conversation was strained. Cutlery clinked too loudly. Glances darted and withdrew. Poirot watched them all. Declan Byrne ate little, his eyes fixed on his plate. Nora Kelleher's hands shook when she lifted her cup. Arthur Bell scribbled notes, then tore the page out and burned it in the hearth. Maeve Flynn sat rigid, her gaze distant. Poirot broke the silence. Last night, he said calmly, someone walked with Seamus O'Rourke toward the cliffs. Nora gasped. Declan looked up sharply. That's impossible. On the contrary, Poirot replied. It is inevitable. Arthur Bell cleared his throat. Are you suggesting coercion? Poirot smiled thinly. I suggest persuasion. Fear is a most effective guide. Maeve spoke quietly. Seamus would not leave the light unattended without reason. Just so, Poirot said. Which means he believed the reason was greater than his duty. That afternoon, Poirot examined the tides. He stood with a notebook at the cliff edge, timing the waves, watching how the sea surged and withdrew. He made careful calculations, noting the rhythm, the intervals. At 12:17, he murmured. The tide was turning. A low tide revealed jagged rocks below rocks that would have torn flesh and bone with merciless efficiency. If he had fallen, Poirot said softly, the sea would have taken him. But Seamus's body had been found intact, broken but not shredded. At the base of the cliff path, Poirot closed his notebook. Placed, he concluded. Not claimed. As dusk fell, Poirot returned to the lighthouse one final time. The fog thinned briefly, allowing the moon to cast pale light through the glass. He noticed something, then something small, easily overlooked. A scrap of fabric caught on a rusted nail near the lower stairwell. Poirot examined it carefully. Dark wool. Fine quality. Not Seamus's? Ah, he said softly. So you came prepared. He slipped the fabric into his pocket. Behind him, a step creaked. Poirot turned. No one was there, but the fog had thickened again, swallowing the doorway, erasing the path back to Foilhomurrum House. For the first time since his arrival, Poirot felt not fear, but anticipation. The case had moved beyond suspicion. Now it had evidence. And evidence. Poirot knew, always led somewhere, whether the guilty wished it or not. Far out at sea, a ship's horn sounded, lost in searching. The lighthouse remained dark. Asterisk. Part 4. A second darkness death returned to Foilhomurrum with the tide. It arrived quietly, without drama, without the violence of crashing waves or screaming wind. It came instead in the stillness of early evening, when the fog thinned just enough to deceive the eye and the mind alike. Hercule Poirot was in the sitting room of Foilhomurrum House, arranging his thoughts with the same care he applied to his mustache. When the scream cut through the silence, it was short, sharp, final. Poirot was on his feet at once. Arthur Bell's room lay at the far end of the upper corridor. The door stood ajar. A faint smell of inked paper and something darker hung in the air. Captain O'Shea reached the doorway first and froze. Poirot stepped past him. Arthur Bell lay slumped over his desk, his head twisted unnaturally to one side. His spectacles were shattered beneath him. A thin line of blood traced its way from his temple across the polished wood, dripping slowly onto the floor. The desk was in chaos. Papers were scattered everywhere, maps, notes, brittle documents written in faded ink. The hearth nearby still glowed faintly, embers consuming the last of a burned page. Poirot did not look at the body at first. He looked at the fire. He tried to destroy something, Poirot said quietly. O'Shea nodded grimly. Looks like he didn't finish. Poirot approached the desk. Arthur Bell's right hand was clenched tightly, knuckles wide even in death. Poirot gently pried the fingers open. Inside was a torn fragment of paper. Only 3 words remained legible. The light never. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. A message interrupted, he murmured, and a truth too dangerous to complete. The house descended into chaos. Nora Kelleher sobbed uncontrollably, her composure shattered. Declan Byrne paced the corridor, running his hands through his hair. May Flynn stood very still, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Poirot watched them all. The guards will say, Poirot announced calmly, that this was a robbery, or an accident, or a quarrel that went too far. He turned toward them. They will be wrong. Declan stopped pacing. You think it's connected to Seamus? Poirot met his gaze. I know it is. Later, after the body had been removed and the guards had withdrawn, Poirot returned to Arthur Bell's room alone. He examined every inch with meticulous care. The window was closed. The door showed no sign of forced entry. The poker lay on the floor near the hearth, heavy, iron, stained. Poirot lifted it carefully. Opportunistic, he said. Not planned in advance, but decisive. His attention returned to the desk. Among the scattered papers, one map stood out. It depicted the coastline around Foilhomurrum, marked with symbols, circles, arrows, numbers. Poirot traced them with a gloved finger. These are not academic notes, he murmured. These are routes. Smuggling routes, hidden coves, signal points. And at the center of it all, Foilhomurrum Lighthouse. Poirot felt a familiar tightening in his chest. This lighthouse, he said softly, is not merely a guide for ships. It is a witness. Downstairs, Poirot found Maeve Flynn standing alone by the fire. You knew Arthur Bell was close to something, Poirot said gently. She did not deny it. He asked me about my husband. Poirot nodded. And what did you tell him? The truth, she replied. That he vanished the night the light failed 20 years ago. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The light failed then as well? Maeve's voice trembled. Briefly. Long enough for a ship to disappear. Poirot inhaled slowly. History, he said, is repeating itself. Poirot sought out Declan Byrne next, finding him in the engine room, staring at the dormant machinery. You repaired the light after Seamus's death, Poirot said. Declan nodded. It's functional now, yet you have not turned it on. Declan's jaw tightened. Orders. Poirot leaned closer. Or fear? Declan looked away. If the light comes on, people will look. Too closely. Poirot smiled sadly. They already are. That night, Poirot sat alone in his room. The scrap of wool fabric from the lighthouse stairs laid carefully beside Arthur Bell's torn message fragment. Dark wool. Fine quality. English tailoring. Poirot's thoughts moved swiftly now. Arthur Bell had known. Seamus O'Rourke had known. Someone else had known and had decided that knowledge must die. Poirot extinguished his lamp. Outside, the fog shifted, revealing the lighthouse briefly still dark. Still accusing. A second darkness, Poirot murmured, is never an accident. Far below, The sea waited patiently, and somewhere within Foilhomurrum House, the killer listened and understood that Hercule Poirot was no longer merely observing. He was closing in. Asterisk. Part 5. The Irish past, the past does not sleep. It waits. Hercule Poirot understood this better than most. He had seen old sins rise from their graves with remarkable persistence, demanding payment long after the living believed the debt forgotten. At Foilhomurrum, the past did not merely linger, it breathed. The morning after Arthur Bell's death arrived with an uneasy clarity. The fog had retreated, leaving the coastline exposed and raw. The sea glittered deceptively, as though nothing terrible had occurred. Poirot stood at the window of his room, gazing toward the lighthouse. In daylight, it appeared almost benign white stone. Clean lines, a symbol of safety. How carefully we choose our symbols. Poirot murmured. Captain O'Shea arrived shortly after breakfast, carrying a leather-bound folder. Old records, he said, setting it on the table. You asked about the lighthouse's history. Poirot opened the folder with reverence. Inside were yellow documents, handwritten logs, and faded photographs. Names leapt out at him. Seamus O'Rourke, Patrick Flynn, Eamon Byrne. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Flynn, he said softly. And Byrne? O'Shea nodded. Maeve's husband, Declan's father. Poirot closed the folder gently. So, he said, the past is not merely present, it is hereditary. The records told a story that official history had chosen to forget. During the years surrounding the Irish War of Independence, Foilhomurrum Lighthouse had served a dual purpose. By day, it guided ships safely along the coast. By night, it sent coded signals, brief extinguishments, altered rotations messages, understood only by those watching from the sea. Smugglers, gunrunners, revolutionaries, and sometimes traitors. Poirot's finger traced a particular entry. April 1921. Light extinguished for 7 minutes. Vessel St. Bridget lost. Cargo unrecovered. Poirot inhaled sharply. 7 minutes. Enough time for a ship to strike the rocks. Enough time for men to die. Poirot requested to speak with Maeve Flynn. She met him in the small chapel near the cliffs, a place rarely used but meticulously maintained. You know this history, Poirot said gently. Maeve nodded. My husband learned it from his father, and Seamus learned it from his. Poirot studied her face. And you? I learned it the night Patrick vanished. Poirot waited. He told me the light had failed on purpose, she said. That someone had signaled the wrong pattern. Poirot's voice was quiet. And that someone was paid. Maeve's eyes filled with tears. Yes. Later, Poirot confronted Declan Byrne. Your father was involved, Poirot said calmly. Declan's face hardened. He was forced. Everyone was back then. Poirot tilted his head. Forced or tempted? Declan slammed his fist against the wall. Do you think it was easy? Hunger. Fear. The English watching everything. Poirot nodded. I think it was complicated. And that guilt survives complexity. Declan looked away. Seamus wanted to talk. He said the truth should come out. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And you disagreed? Declan said nothing. That afternoon, Poirot returned to Arthur Bell's papers. Among them, he found a letter unsent, unfinished. The light never failed by chance. It was extinguished by men who believed themselves patriots, but who sold their souls for gold. The lighthouse remembers. So, Poirot folded the letter carefully. So, he murmured. Arthur Bell was not merely a historian. He was a judge. As dusk approached, Poirot walked alone to the lighthouse. He climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately, stopping at the lantern room. He examined the mechanism with renewed understanding. The light, he said softly, is an instrument of truth. It reveals or conceals. He adjusted the lens slightly, watching how the beam would fall once lit. 7 minutes. Poirot closed his eyes. 7 minutes, he repeated. Twice. That night, Poirot gathered the remaining residents in the sitting room. You are all connected, he said calmly. Not by chance. By history. Nora Kelleher looked confused. I don't understand. Poirot turned to her. You will. He addressed them all. 2 men are dead because they wished to speak. Because they believed silence had lasted long enough. Maeve's voice trembled. And the killer? Poirot's gaze was steady. The killer is not afraid of the past. He paused. The killer is the past. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. Far out at sea, a ship's light flickered uncertainly, searching for guidance. The lighthouse remained dark dot, and in that darkness, old ghosts stirred restless, angry, and demanding resolution. Asterisk Part 6. Lies among the living truth. Poirot often reflected, was rarely hidden well. It did not vanish. It merely changed shape. At Foilhomurrum, truth had taken the form of silence thick, deliberate, and shared the morning after the revelations of the past dawned cold and bright. The sea was restless, its waves striking the rocks with renewed aggression. As though impatient with human delay, Poirot sat at the dining table, his breakfast untouched. Today, he murmured, we separate truth from loyalty. Captain O'Shea had arranged for the guards to remain nearby, but Poirot insisted they keep their distance. The killer, Poirot explained, is not reckless. He or she kills only when speech threatens. O'Shea frowned. You think there will be another? Poirot's eyes were grave. I fear there already has been an attempt. Nora Kelleher's lie. Poirot found Nora in the old infirmary room, sorting bottles with unnecessary precision. You lied to me, Poirot said gently. She froze. You told me you came to Foilhomurrum for quiet, he continued. But you did not come for quiet. You came for distance. Her shoulders sagged. I didn't want anyone to know. Know what? That my father was on the St. Bridget. Poirot inhaled softly. He survived, Nora whispered. Barely. He never spoke again. When I learned what happened here, I came. Poirot's gaze was kind but piercing. Did you kill Seamus? She shook her head violently. No, he was kind to me. He wanted to confess to the families. Poirot nodded. And someone could not allow that. Declan Burns Oliver Declan claimed he had been repairing coastal equipment the night Seamus died. Poirot tested this carefully. You were alone? Poirot asked. Yes. Poirot produced a scrap of dark wool fabric. Declan's face drained of color. That's from my coat, he said hoarsely. Poirot tilted his head. Indeed. But you told me you never entered the lighthouse that night. Declan clenched his fists. I followed Seamus. I wanted to stop him. From speaking? From destroying everything, Declan snapped. My father's name. Maeve's husband. All of us. Poirot's voice hardened. Did you push him? Declan shook his head. No, he slipped. I swear it. Poirot said nothing, but he did not believe him. Maeve Flynn's secret Maeve met Poirot near the cliffs, the wind tearing at her coat. You knew Arthur Bell was in danger, Poirot said. Yes, she replied. And I did nothing. Poirot waited. I thought if he died, the truth would die with him, she said quietly. I was wrong. Poirot's eyes softened. Guilt does not excuse murder. She met his gaze. But it explained silence. The attempt that evening. The wind rose sharply. Poirot stood in the lantern room, examining the mechanism, when a sudden noise echoed from below, a cry, followed by the sound of metal striking stone. Poirot ran. At the base of the stairs lay Declan Byrne, unconscious, blood trickling from his temple. Beside him, the disengagement lever had been loosened again. Captain O'Shea arrived moments later. He fell? Poirot shook his head. He was pushed. O'Shea stiffened. Then the killer is still here. Poirot nodded, and growing desperate, as Declan was carried away. Poirot noticed something new. The light mechanism bore afresh, markings scratched deliberately into the metal. 7 short lines. Poirot stared at them. A signature, he murmured. Or a confession. He straightened slowly. The lies had begun to collapse. The killer was no longer protecting the past. He was punishing the present. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon. Darkness crept across the sea once more. But this time, Poirot knew the light would soon return. and when it did, it would expose everything. Asterisk Part 7, the third shadow. The third shadow fell before anyone realized the sun had fully risen. Foilhomurrum awoke to a pale, uncertain morning. The sky was clear, almost cruelly so, as though nature itself wished to observe the consequences of human secrecy without obstruction. Hercule Poirot stood at the foot of the lighthouse, his expression grave. "They will call it suicide," he said quietly. Captain O'Shea looked at him sharply. "You haven't even seen the body yet." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "I have seen human nature." The body below Maeve Flynn lay at the base of the cliff path, her body twisted among the rocks. Her coat fluttered faintly in the breeze, caught on a jagged stone. The guards murmured among themselves. "She must have jumped," one said. "Grief, guilt." Poirot shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "She was placed." O'Shea frowned. "There's no sign of a struggle." Poirot pointed with his cane. "Look at her shoes. Clean solace. No descent. No hesitation." He crouched, examining the rocks. "And here no blood spatter on the cliff face. She did not fall from above." O'Shea's face darkened. "Then she was killed elsewhere." "Precisely," Poirot said. "And brought here to speak a lie." The truth of Maeve Flynn. Poirot returned to Foilhomurrum House and entered Maeve's room. Everything was orderly. Too orderly. He examined her desk and found a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To whoever finds this inside," was a letter. "I thought silence would protect us. I was wrong. Patrick deserved justice. So did the men who died at sea. If I'm gone, know this." The light was turned off by someone who still lives. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "She was ready to speak," he murmured. "And so she was silenced." The patent revealed Poirot gathered the survivors Nora Kelleher and the injured Declan Byrne in the sitting room. 3 deaths, Poirot said calmly. Each connected to the lighthouse. Each connected to truth. Declan's voice was weak. "You think Maeve was murdered?" "I know it," Poirot replied. Nora whispered. "Then who is left?" Poirot's eyes turned to her. "You," he said gently. "And the killer. The code of light, that afternoon." Poirot returned to the lantern room. He studied the scratched markings again. 7 lines. 7 minutes. Poirot adjusted the mechanism and, for the first time since his arrival, allowed the light to ignite briefly. It flashed. Once. Twice. Then paused. Poirot's breath caught. "It is not random," he said softly. "It is a code. Morse. 7 short pulses. A pause. 7 again. A message hidden in darkness." Poirot smiled grimly. "You did not invent this," he said. "You inherited it." Nora's revelation. Poirot found Nora standing by the cliffs at sunset. "You understand the code?" Poirot said. She nodded slowly. "My father taught me. They learned it watching the coast." Poirot's voice was calm. "And someone else knows it too." Nora's eyes widened. "Declan?" Poirot did not answer. That night, Poirot sat alone, writing carefully. The killer had staged a suicide, had attempted another murder, had left a coded signature. This was no longer about protection. It was about control. Outside, the lighthouse stood illuminated for the first time in days, its beam cutting through the darkness with surgical precision. Poirot watched it turn. 3 shadows, he murmured, and 1 light. The end was approaching. And the killer knew it. Asterisk Part 8. The false culprit confessions, Poirot often said, were the most unreliable form of evidence. They arrived wrapped in emotion, fear, guilt, love, and were rarely what they appeared to be. At Foilhomurrum, the confession came just after dawn. Declan Byrne lay pale and bandaged in the infirmary room when Captain O'Shea burst in, disbelief etched across his face. "He's confessed," O'Shea said. "To everything." Poirot did not look surprised. "He would," Poirot replied quietly. Declan's confession. Declan's voice was hoarse, his eyes hollow. "I followed Seamus," he said. "I argued with Arthur. I pushed Maeve." Nora gasped. Poirot raised a hand. "Continue." Declan swallowed. "I couldn't let the past destroy us. My father made mistakes, but he paid. We all did." Poirot watched him carefully. "You confess," Poirot said, "to 3 different deaths, each committed in 3 different ways, at 3 different times, while you were unconscious for one of them." Declan flinched. Captain O'Shea frowned. "You think he's lying?" Poirot shook his head. "No, I think he is protecting someone." The flawed Poirot leaned closer to Declan. "You could not have killed Maeve," Poirot said gently. "She was dead before you left your bed." Declan's eyes filled with tears. "Then it was all for nothing." Poirot straightened. "Not nothing," he said. "For love." The realization Poirot stepped outside with Nora. "You were there," Poirot said quietly. "When Maeve died." Nora shook her head. "I found her." Poirot's eyes softened. "And you moved her." She collapsed against the stone wall. "I didn't kill her," Nora whispered. "But I couldn't let them blame Declan." Poirot nodded. "You are brave. But bravery does not erase truth." The missing piece Poirot returned to the lighthouse alone. He examined the mechanism once more. Something was missing. A small brass key. Poirot smiled. "So," he murmured, "you did not confess because you are guilty. You confessed because you are afraid." That evening, Poirot gathered everyone once more. "There will be one final meeting," he announced. "At the lighthouse." Nora's voice trembled. "Why there?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Because the light will tell us the truth." Outside, the beam turned steadily, patient and revealing. The false culprit had spoken. Now it was time for the real one to be unmasked. End of Part 8. Say Part 9 when ready. And we will enter the classic. Poirot confrontation in The Gathering at the Light. Shadows at Foilhomurrum Lighthouse. A Hercule Poirot Irish Mystery Part 8. The False Culprit Confessions. Hercule Poirot often reflected were among the most unreliable of human inventions. They were born not of truth, but of emotion, fear, love, despair, and sometimes a desperate desire to bring chaos to an end. At Foilhomurrum, the confession arrived with the inevitability of the tide, and with just as much deception. It came at dawn. The confession Captain O'Shea found Poirot in the small breakfast room, seated with geometric precision at the table, buttering toast he had no intention of eating. "He's confessed," O'Shea said bluntly. Poirot did not look up. "Ah, so it has begun." O'Shea blinked. "You expected this?" "I feared it," Poirot replied, setting the knife down carefully. "There is a difference." Declan Byrne lay in the infirmary, pale and drawn, his head bandaged, his arm immobilized. He looked older than his years, as though the weight of history had finally pressed him flat. "I did it," Declan said hoarsely when Poirot entered. "All of it." Poirot pulled a chair close and sat. "Tell me," he said gently. Declan swallowed. Seamus wanted to confess. Arthur wanted to publish. Maeve lost her nerve. "And you?" Poirot asked. "I stopped them." Poirot's eyes never left Declan's face. "How?" he asked softly. Declan hesitated. "I followed Seamus to the cliffs. I argued with Arthur in his room. I pushed Maeve." Poirot nodded slowly. "You are a man of impressive energy," he said. "To murder 3 people in 3 locations, using 3 methods while unconscious for one of them." Declan's jaw tightened. Captain O'Shea frowned. "You think he's lying?" Poirot sighed. "No, I think he is sacrificing himself." A protective lie. Poirot leaned closer to Declan. "You did not kill Maeve Flynn," Poirot said quietly. "She was already dead when you fell in the lighthouse stairwell." Declan's eyes filled with tears. "Then I failed." Poirot shook his head. "You succeeded in one thing. You revealed your motive." Declan looked away. "My father's name. Maeve's husband. All of them ruined if the truth came out." Poirot's oaths. "Truth does not ruin the innocent. It only unmasks the guilty." Nora's burden. Poirot found Nora Kelleher standing alone near the cliffs, her coat pulled tightly around her. "You moved Maeve's body," Poirot said, calmly. Nora stiffened. "I couldn't let them blame Declan." Poirot nodded. "You are loyal. But loyalty is not innocence." Tears streamed down her face. I didn't kill her. I swear. Poirot believed her. The missing key back in the lighthouse. Poirot examined the light mechanism once more. The brass key was gone. The final piece. Poirot smiled faintly. You confessed because you are afraid, he murmured. And because someone else taught you to be. That evening, Poirot gathered them all. There will be one final meeting, he announced. At the lighthouse, Nora whispered. Why there? Poirot's eyes glinted. Because the light does not lie. The false culprit had spoken. Now the truth would shine. Asterisk. Part 9. The gathering at the light, the wind howled along the cliffs, carrying with it the chill and salt of the Atlantic. Night had settled over Foilhomurrum, but the lighthouse's beam cut through the darkness with relentless clarity. This time, it was Poirot who had allowed it to shine not as a guide to ships, but as a lantern to illuminate human secrets. He had summoned the survivors, Nora Kelleher, Declan Byrne, and Maeve Flynn's spirit of influence lingering over them all. Each arrived at the base of the lighthouse, tension taut enough to be cut with a knife. Poirot waited in the lantern room, the brass mechanism gleaming, his little gray cells alert and precise. Welcome, he said, his voice calm and measured. Tonight, the shadows end, and the light reveals everything. Reconstruction of events, Poirot began at the beginning. Seamus O'Rourke, he said, was the first victim. He died because he alone knew how the past reached into the present. He believed in revealing the truth. Someone could not permit that. He gestured to Declan. You followed him to the cliffs, not to kill him, but to persuade him to silence. Declan nodded. Yes, I never intended his death. I swear. Poirot's eyes were steady. Yet you failed, and someone else took advantage. Next, he turned to Arthur Bell. Arthur Bell knew the codes. He discovered the historical crimes, the smuggling, the betrayals. He sought to reveal them, and he paid for it with his life. Arthur's papers had been scattered in the fire. The letters, the maps, all pieces of a puzzle intentionally left incomplete. Poirot held up the fragment of the note. The light never failed by chance. Poirot's finger traced the words. This message was interrupted, and that interruption was murder. The third death, Poirot's gaze fell upon the spot where Maeve had died. She was ready to confess, but she was silenced, and her death was staged to look like suicide. Only someone intimately familiar with the lighthouse mechanism could execute such a plan without leaving a trace. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The false culprit, Poirot said softly, was Declan Byrne's protective confession. He took blame to shield another. Nora gasped, and Declan's eyes widened. The real killer, Poirot's gaze became sharp, deliberate. The real culprit, he said, is among us. One who understands the past, one who controls the present, one who inherited knowledge of the codes, the secrets, the signals. He stepped forward. It is you. Nora looked shocked. Declan stiffened. Maeve's influence, though unseen, seemed to hover in tense silence. You, Poirot repeated. You moved the bodies, staged the suicide, left the coded scratches because you believed the truth could never be revealed. Revealing the motive, Poirot continued methodically. The motive is threefold: revenge, inheritance, and historical guilt. The lighthouse has always been a sentinel, keeping secrets of men who died for their choices. The past demanded payment. The present supplied it. He turned to the guilty party, whose shoulders stiffened, whose eyes betrayed the struggle between pride and panic. You believed yourself justified, Poirot said gently, because the past stained your family's name. But morality is not inherited. Murder is murder. The room was silent, except for the wind, the pulse of the lighthouse beam, and the faint shuffling of feet. The little gray cells triumphed, Poirot concluded. 3 shadows fell, yes. 1 light returned. That light, ladies and gentlemen, reveals everything. The lighthouse is a witness. History is a witness. And so am I. He gestured toward the beam, rotating steadily across the cliffs, the waves, and the darkened house. Now, justice will be measured not only by law, but by revelation. The guilty party sank into the chair, defeated and confessed at last not out of fear, but under the calm and inevitable pressure of Poirot's logic. Outside, the Atlantic waves crashed, the lighthouse spun, and the night seemed lighter than it had in decades. Hercule Poirot, mustache immaculate, folded his hands. The case of Foilhomurrum Lighthouse was solved. Part 10. When the light returns, the final dawn at Foilhomurrum rose with a clarity that felt almost miraculous after so many days of fog, shadows, and suspense. The Atlantic glimmered like molten silver, and the lighthouse, now fully functional, cast a steady beam across the cliffs and sea. Hercule Poirot stood at the lantern room window, observing the light's rhythm. The case was concluded, but the consequences of truth lingered like the last notes of a solemn melody. The killer, revealed the guilty party, revealed the previous night sat quietly in the sitting room of Foilhomurrum House, exhausted, broken, but finally unburdened. The confessions and Poirot's meticulous deductions had stripped away every pretense. The motive, Poirot said, addressing all the remaining survivors, was not simple greed, nor mere passion. It was layered: revenge, fear, historical guilt. You believed the past demanded justice, and you acted to satisfy it. Nora Kelleher, Declenburn, and Mae Flynn's spirit of memory hung heavy in the air, a family tied by the lighthouse's secrets, bound by decisions long made and consequences long deferred. Poirot continued, calm, precise, his little gray cells unrelenting. But justice, true justice, cannot rely on concealment or murder. Only revelation enlightens. The guilty party lowered their head. Silence filled the room. Poirot's words were both hammer and balm, striking truth and offering absolution. The aftermathing the following days, Foilhomurrum returned to its quiet vigilance. The lighthouse, once a symbol of hidden secrets and lost lives, became what it was always meant to be: a guide, a protector of the living. Declenburn, cleared of murder charges due to his protective confession, resolved to repair the lighthouse's history rather than hide from it. He began meticulously cataloging the old signal codes and historical documents Arthur Bell had left behind. Nora Kelleher, strengthened by the ordeal, decided to remain in Ireland, dedicating herself to preserving the stories of the men and women lost along the western cliffs. She carried Mae Flynn's story as a living memorial. Even Captain O'Shea, whose retirement had been interrupted by the strange events, found solace in knowing that the lighthouse would continue to watch over ships, just as Poirot had watched over the living and the dead. The light and memory Poirot, as always, remained apart. He walked the cliffs at sunrise, gazing toward the horizon, reflecting on human nature and history. The past, he murmured to himself, never truly vanishes. It hides, waits, and sometimes strikes. But the light, it remembers. And in remembering, it teaches. He looked at the lighthouse, the great mechanism spinning steadily, the lens catching the first sun rays. In Ireland, he continued softly, as in all places, one must trust in the little gray cells, not only to solve crimes, but to understand them, for only understanding ensures peace. Poirot straightened, adjusting his gloves. His mission complete, he turned away from the lighthouse and began walking back toward Foilhomurrum House, where the survivors would rebuild their lives. Outside, the Atlantic gleamed endlessly, indifferent and eternal, but the lighthouse beam symbol of truth, memory, and revelation swept faithfully across the cliffs. No longer a shadow, but a guardian of light.